Sarah Martinez walked through the bustling military recruitment office, clutching her paperwork nervously. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as dozens of young men and women filled out forms, their dreams of serving their country written across their determined faces. At 22, Sarah had finally worked up the courage to enlist, despite her grandmother's worried protests and her mother's tears. She had always felt different from her peers. While other college graduates were planning corporate careers or graduate school, Sarah felt a deeper calling. Something in her blood seemed to pull her towards service, towards something greater than herself. Her friends thought she was crazy for giving up her marketing degree, but Sarah knew this was her path. The recruitment office was a maze of desks and chairs, with military posters covering every available wall space. Sarah found an empty seat and began filling out the endless paperwork. Name, address, education, medical history. Each question seemed routine until she reached the section about tattoos and body modifications. Sarah hesitated, her pen hovering over the form. On her left forearm, barely visible beneath her long-sleeved shirt, was a small tattoo she had gotten on her 18th birthday. It wasn't like the typical butterflies or inspirational quotes her friends had chosen. This tattoo was different, a series of numbers and symbols that looked almost military in nature. Echo 7 Delta 9 1968. Her grandmother had given her the design, pressed into her hands on a piece of yellowed paper during Sarah's high school graduation party. "When you're old enough, mija," her grandmother had whispered in heavily accented English, "you get this tattoo. It's important. It's who you are." Her grandmother's eyes had been filled with an emotion Sarah couldn't identify at the time, pride mixed with something that looked like fear. Sarah had asked what the numbers meant, but her grandmother had simply shaken her head. "Someday you'll understand. Your grandfather, he would have wanted this." That was all her grandmother would say about it, and Sarah's parents seemed just as mystified by the request as she was. Now, 4 years later, Sarah still didn't understand the significance of the tattoo. Her grandmother had passed away 2 years ago, taking the secret with her. The numbers and letters had become just another part of Sarah's identity, like a birthmark she had chosen rather than inherited. She marked yes on the tattoo question and provided a brief description, then continued with the rest of the paperwork. The process took hours: background checks, references, medical examinations, and multiple interviews with different personnel. Each step brought her closer to her goal of serving in the military. During her medical examination, the doctor noted the tattoo, but said nothing unusual about it. The numbers were photographed and documented as part of her official record, just like any other identifying mark. Sarah rolled her sleeve back down and thought nothing more of it. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Sarah quit her part-time job at a local coffee shop, said goodbye to friends, and packed her belongings. Her mother cried every time she saw the military paperwork spread across the kitchen table, but her father seemed proud, even if he worried about her safety. On a crisp Tuesday morning in October, Sarah reported to the military entrance processing station for final processing before shipping out to basic training. The building was imposing, all concrete and glass, with American flags flying prominently at the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was businesslike and efficient. Dozens of new recruits moved through various stations like an assembly line. Sarah joined the queue for final medical clearance, standing behind a tall young man who kept adjusting his glasses nervously. In front of him was a woman about Sarah's age who looked confident and eager. They exchanged small talk about where they were from and what military occupational specialties they hoped to pursue. The medical clearance process was thorough but routine. Sarah had been through similar examinations during her initial processing, so she knew what to expect. When her turn came, she rolled up her sleeves as instructed and waited while the medical technician reviewed her file. "Small tattoo on left forearm," the technician read aloud, making notes on his clipboard. He examined the tattoo briefly, taking measurements and noting its location. Echo 7 Delta 9 1968, he read the symbols aloud. Interesting choice. Family military history? Sarah shrugged. I'm not sure. It was something my grandmother wanted me to get, but she never explained what it meant. The technician nodded and continued his examination. Sarah's heart rate, blood pressure, and vision were all checked one final time. Everything was normal, and she was cleared for departure to basic training the following week. As Sarah left the medical station, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was really happening. She was about to begin her military career. The tattoo on her arm felt slightly warm under her sleeve, as if it were somehow alive and aware of the significance of this moment. She had no way of knowing that her file, complete with the photograph and description of her tattoo, was already making its way through military databases. The combination of numbers and letters that her grandmother had insisted she wear permanently on her skin was about to trigger a chain of events that would change Sarah's life forever. That evening, Sarah packed her final belongings into a single duffel bag, as instructed. Her mother made her favorite dinner, tamales and rice, and the family sat around the kitchen table sharing stories and memories. Her younger brother teased her about becoming a military robot, but she could see the pride in his eyes. As Sarah lay in bed that night, she traced the tattoo on her arm with her finger. The numbers and symbols felt raised slightly above her skin, even though the tattoo was 4 years old and completely healed. She wondered again what her grandmother had been thinking when she insisted on this particular design. Echo 7 Delta 9 1968. Sarah whispered the combination into the darkness of her childhood bedroom. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey that would take her far from this small Texas town, far from everything familiar and comfortable. But tonight, she was still just Sarah Martinez, a young woman with dreams and a mysterious tattoo that would soon reveal its true significance. Basic training at Fort Benning was everything Sarah had expected and nothing like she had imagined. The Georgia heat was oppressive. The drill sergeants were relentless, and every muscle in her body ached from the constant physical demands. But Sarah thrived in ways that surprised even herself. She excelled at marksmanship, her steady hands and natural focus making her one of the top shooters in her company. During combat training exercises, she displayed an intuitive understanding of tactics that impressed her instructors. Her fellow recruits began looking to her for leadership during group challenges, even though she had never considered herself a natural leader. "Martinez!" Drill Sergeant Williams called out during their 6th week of training. "Front and center!" Sarah jogged over to where the drill sergeant stood with his clipboard, wondering what she had done wrong this time. The man's face was unreadable behind his trademark scowl, but there was something different in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity rather than irritation. "You've got orders to report to the company commander's office after chow," he said, his voice carrying its usual authority but lacking its typical edge. "Clean uniform, polished boots. Don't embarrass me." Sarah's stomach dropped. In basic training, being called to the commander's office usually meant one of two things: serious trouble or serious news from home. She spent the rest of the morning running through every possible mistake she might have made, every rule she might have broken, without realizing it. After lunch, Sarah knocked on Captain Rodriguez's office door with perfectly polished boots and a uniform she had spent 20 minutes pressing to perfection. The captain was a respected officer known for being fair but demanding, and Sarah had only seen him from a distance during formal inspections. "Enter," came the crisp command from inside. Sarah stepped into the office and snapped to attention. "Private Martinez reporting as ordered, sir." Captain Rodriguez looked up from the paperwork spread across his desk. He was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes that seemed to see everything. Behind him, the American flag stood in one corner, and his desk was covered with what looked like personnel files and military documents. At ease. "Private," the captain said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please, have a seat." This was unusual. Recruits in basic training rarely sat in commanding officers' offices unless they were in serious trouble. Sarah perched on the edge of the chair, her back straight and hands folded in her lap. Captain Rodriguez picked up a file from his desk. Sarah recognized it as her personnel record. "Private Martinez, I need to ask you about something in your file, specifically about a tattoo on your left forearm." Sarah's heart began to race. "Yes, sir. It's documented in my medical records. The tattoo reads Echo 7 Delta 9 1968, correct?" "Yes, sir." The captain leaned forward, his expression becoming more intense. "Can you tell me where you got this tattoo design? Who chose those specific numbers and letters?" Sarah swallowed hard. "My grandmother gave me the design, sir. She insisted I get it when I turned 18, but she never explained what it meant. I asked many times, but she would never tell me." "What was your grandmother's name?" "Elena Martinez, sir. Elena Vasquez before she married my grandfather." Captain Rodriguez made notes on a separate piece of paper. "And your grandfather?" "I never met him, sir. He died before I was born. My grandmother rarely talked about him, except to say he was a good man who served his country." The captain was quiet for a long moment, studying the file in front of him. Sarah could hear the clock on the wall ticking and the muffled sounds of other recruits training outside. The silence stretched on until she began to wonder if she was supposed to speak. Finally, Captain Rodriguez looked up. "Private Martinez, I'm going to share something with you that is classified information. What I tell you cannot leave this office. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, though her confusion was growing by the minute. "The combination on your tattoo, Echo 7 Delta 9 1968, is a military designation. Specifically, it's the call sign and mission date for a classified operation during the Vietnam War. An operation that officially never happened." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Sir? Your grandfather wasn't just a soldier, Private Martinez. He was part of an elite special operations unit that conducted some of the most dangerous and sensitive missions of that war. The tattoo you're wearing is his unit designation and the date of his final mission, a mission from which he never returned." The room seemed to spin slightly. Sarah gripped the arms of her chair, trying to process what she was hearing. Her grandfather, the man she had never met, the man her grandmother rarely spoke of, had been some kind of special forces soldier? "But, sir, my grandmother said he died before I was born. She never mentioned anything about him being missing in action." Captain Rodriguez nodded grimly. "The families of soldiers in classified units often weren't told the full truth about their missions or their fates. Officially, your grandfather was killed in action during a routine patrol. Unofficially, he disappeared during a deep reconnaissance mission in enemy territory. His body was never recovered." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes, though she wasn't sure if they were from sadness, pride, or shock. "Why would my grandmother have his unit designation? How would she even know it?" "That's what makes this situation extraordinary," the captain said, leaning back in his chair. "The only way she could have known those specific details would be if your grandfather shared them with her before his final mission, something that would have violated every security protocol in existence, or what, sir? Or if someone from his unit survived and found a way to contact her years later." The implications of this statement hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's mind raced with questions and possibilities. Had her grandfather broken protocol to share classified information with his wife? Had someone else from his unit survived the mission and tracked down her grandmother decades later? "Private Martinez," Captain Rodriguez continued, There are people in the Department of Defense who have been very interested in that particular mission for over 50 years. When your tattoo showed up in our system during processing, it triggered some attention from very high up the chain of command. Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. What does that mean for me, sir? It means that your military career is about to become very different from what you planned. There are officers who want to meet with you, people who knew your grandfather, people who have questions that only you might be able to answer. The captain stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds where Sarah's fellow recruits were running obstacle courses in the afternoon heat. Your grandmother never said anything else about your grandfather? Never mentioned any names, places, or details about his service? Sarah thought hard, searching her memories of her grandmother's final years. She used to have nightmares sometimes. She would call out names in her sleep, military-sounding names, and there was a box she kept in her bedroom closet locked away. My mother and I found it after she died, but we couldn't find the key. Captain Rodriguez turned back to face her, his expression urgent. Private Martinez, where is that box now? At my mother's house in Texas, sir. We never opened it because it felt wrong to break the lock. My grandmother was very private about her personal things. The captain returned to his desk and picked up his phone. I'm going to make some calls. You're going to finish basic training, but there may be some changes to your assignment afterward. In the meantime, I need you to contact your mother and ask her to secure that box. Don't open it. Don't let anyone else handle it. Just keep it safe. Sarah nodded, still trying to process everything she had learned. Her quiet grandmother, who had spent her final years watching soap operas and tending her garden, had been the widow of a special operations soldier. The mysterious tattoo she had carried for 4 years was actually a memorial to a grandfather she had never known, a man who had died serving his country in ways she was only now beginning to understand. As Sarah stood to leave, Captain Rodriguez called her name one more time. Private Martinez, your grandfather was a hero. Whatever questions arise from this situation, whatever changes come to your military service, remember that. You're carrying his legacy now. Walking back to her barracks in the fading Georgia sunlight, Sarah felt the weight of the tattoo on her arm differently than she ever had before. It wasn't just ink in her skin anymore. It was a connection to a family history she had never known existed. A bridge between her present and a past filled with secrets and sacrifice. 3 months after graduating from basic training, Sarah found herself on a military transport plane bound for Washington, D.C., clutching a small wooden box in her lap. Her mother had overnight shipped the locked box from Texas, along with a letter explaining that she had found the key hidden inside one of Grandmother Elena's old prayer books. The box contained treasures that had rewritten everything Sarah thought she knew about her family. Faded photographs showed her grandfather in military fatigues, standing with other soldiers in what looked like jungle terrain. There were letters written in Spanish, some in her grandmother's handwriting and others in a masculine script that must have belonged to her grandfather. Most importantly, there was an official-looking document with military seals and stamps that Sarah couldn't fully understand, but which seemed to authorize some kind of special mission. Sarah's assignment to the Pentagon had come as a complete surprise. While her fellow basic training graduates were shipping out to various bases around the world, Sarah received orders to report to a special intelligence unit that she had never heard of. Her drill sergeants seemed as mystified as she was, but orders were orders. Now, walking through the imposing corridors of the Pentagon with her escort, a serious-faced sergeant named Davis, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of her situation. The building was vast and maze-like, filled with officers whose uniforms displayed more ribbons and insignia than Sarah had ever seen outside of movies. Conference Room 7 Alpha, Sergeant Davis announced, stopping in front of a heavy wooden door marked with nothing more than a number. They're waiting for you inside, Private Martinez. Take your time. Answer their questions honestly. And remember that everyone in that room has top-secret clearance." Sarah took a deep breath and knocked on the door. "Enter," came a voice from inside. The conference room was smaller than Sarah had expected, with a polished wooden table surrounded by 8 chairs. 5 of the chairs were occupied by military officers of various ranks and ages, and 1 civilian in a dark suit. At the head of the table sat a silver-haired man whose uniform displayed more decorations than Sarah had ever seen on one person. The silver-haired officer stood as Sarah entered. "Private Martinez, I'm General Harrison. Please, have a seat." Sarah sat down carefully, placing the wooden box on the table in front of her. The officers were all staring at her with intense interest, and she felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Private," General Harrison began, "what you're about to learn cannot leave this room. The operation your grandfather participated in, Echo 7 Delta, was part of a classified program that has remained secret for over 5 decades. The mission took place in 1968, during the height of the Vietnam conflict, and officially, it never happened." An officer with colonel's eagles spoke up. "Your grandfather, Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, was part of a 12-man team tasked with retrieving sensitive intelligence from deep behind enemy lines. The mission was considered nearly suicidal. But the intelligence they were after could have changed the course of the war." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she listened. "What happened to them, sir?" "The team went dark 3 days into the mission," General Harrison replied. "No radio contact, no extraction signal. A search and rescue operation found evidence of combat, but no survivors and no bodies. All 12 men were declared killed in action, and their families were told they died in a helicopter crash during a routine transport mission." The civilian leaned forward. "Private Martinez, I'm Director Walsh from the Defense Intelligence Agency. 3 weeks ago, we received intelligence from Vietnam indicating that your grandfather and 2 other members of his team may have survived that mission." Sarah's heart stopped. "Survived? But that was over 50 years ago." "They would be in their 80s now, if they're still alive," Director Walsh continued. "Vietnamese government sources have reported that 3 American prisoners of war have been living in a remote village near the Cambodian border for decades. The physical descriptions and ages match 3 members of the Echo 7 Delta team, including your grandfather." The room fell silent except for the humming of fluorescent lights overhead. Sarah stared at the officials around the table, trying to process what they were telling her. Her grandfather, who she had never met, who her grandmother had mourned as dead for over 50 years, might still be alive. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. General Harrison opened a file folder and pulled out a photograph. "Because of this." The photo showed an elderly Asian woman holding up a piece of paper. On the paper, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, Echo 7 Delta 9 1968, and underneath, Elena Martinez, granddaughter Sarah. Sarah gasped, recognizing her grandmother's name. "How?" "The Vietnamese authorities believe that one of the prisoners has been trying to get a message to family members for years," Director Walsh explained. "This photograph was taken 6 months ago in the village where they're reportedly being held. Someone there knows about your grandmother, knows about you, and knows the significance of that tattoo on your arm." Colonel Peters, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Private Martinez, we need to ask you to consider a very unusual assignment. The Vietnamese government has agreed to allow a small diplomatic mission to visit this village and verify whether these men are indeed American POWs. If they are, we'll negotiate for their repatriation." "You want me to go to Vietnam?" Sarah asked, incredulous. "We want you to be part of the team that makes contact," General Harrison said. "If one of those men is your grandfather, you might be the key to convincing him to trust us. After 50 years in captivity, he may not believe that any rescue attempt is legitimate. But if he sees you, sees that tattoo—" Sarah looked down at her left forearm, where the numbers and letters were hidden beneath her uniform sleeve. The tattoo that had seemed like a family mystery for 4 years was suddenly the most important thing about her. What about my training? My military career? This would be your military career, Director Walsh said. If this mission is successful, if we can bring these men home, you'll have participated in one of the most significant humanitarian operations in modern military history. The experience and security clearances you'll gain will open doors to intelligence and special operations communities that most soldiers never see. General Harrison stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Potomac River. Private Martinez, I served 2 tours in Vietnam. I knew men who never came home, families who never got answers about what happened to their sons and fathers. This may be our last chance to bring some of those men back alive. Sarah opened the wooden box and pulled out one of the photographs of her grandfather. In the picture, he looked young and confident, standing with his arm around another soldier. Both men were smiling despite being in what was obviously a combat zone. If I agree to this, Sarah said slowly, what exactly would my role be? Colonel Peters answered. You'll undergo accelerated training in intelligence gathering, diplomatic protocol, and language basics. You'll be part of a 5-person team that includes a diplomat, a doctor, an intelligence specialist, and a military liaison. Your job will be to help identify whether one of these prisoners is your grandfather and to assist in establishing trust if he is. How soon would this happen? The Vietnamese have given us a 2-week window next month, Director Walsh said. If you agree, you'll leave for specialized training in 3 days. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of the officers and officials who were waiting for her answer. 6 months ago, she had been a college graduate working in a coffee shop, dreaming of serving her country. Now she was being asked to potentially reunite with a grandfather she had never met, in a mission that could rewrite both their family's history and her own future. She thought about her grandmother, Elena, who had carried the secret of her husband's true fate for over 50 years. She thought about the nightmares her grandmother used to have, calling out names in her sleep. She thought about the tattoo on her arm and the weight of family legacy that she was only now beginning to understand. General, Sarah said, looking directly at the silver-haired officer, when do I start training? 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself in a small helicopter flying over the Vietnamese countryside toward a village that didn't appear on most maps. On her arm, the tattoo that had once been a mystery was now a beacon of hope, a connection across decades of separation, a bridge between a young woman's future and an old man's past. As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone, Sarah whispered a prayer in Spanish, the way her grandmother had taught her years ago. Whether she was about to meet her grandfather or help bring closure to another family's long wait for answers, she knew that her life would never be the same again. The tattoo on her arm seemed to pulse with warmth as the helicopter touched down in the red dirt of a Vietnamese village, 57 years after her grandfather had disappeared into the jungle on a mission that was supposed to last only 3 days.